Between the mid-19th century and the early 20th, the American West became a living frontier. Contested lands, railroads cutting through deserts, laws made on the fly. Out of that mix of fact and myth came eccentric doctors, lightning-fast sheriffs, and outlaws who wrote poetry. Want to hear 25 jaw-dropping stories? Stick with me and find out how it all shaped the nation. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep making videos like this. Number 1. George Big Nose Parrott, an outlaw of the Old West, was lynched in 1881. His body ended up in the hands of John Eugene Osborne, a doctor who later became governor of Wyoming. Osborne had the skin tanned and made into a pair of boots, which he wore at his inauguration. It was also turned into a suitcase. The skull was sawed open. The top half went to Lillian Heath, the first female doctor in the state, who used it as an ashtray and a doorstop. Osborne and a colleague even opened the brain to look for signs of a criminal mind, a common belief back then, though never actually proven. The story echoed through the saloons. Macabre trophies showed off power and fear, reminding everyone that the frontier blended shaky science, ambitious politics, and rough justice. Number 2. John Wesley Hardin became a legend of the Old West. He claimed to have killed dozens and used that as his calling card in saloons. After spending more than 20 years in prison, he got out trying to reinvent himself, but he still had enemies. In 1895 in El Paso, he was shot in the back by John Selman. Years earlier in Abilene, tired of cards and whiskey, he tried to get some sleep in a hotel. The snoring from the next room drove him mad. When his request for silence got no answer, he fired through the wall and killed the man next door. Number 3. In northern Texas, Fort Griffin grew where Clear Creek meets the Brazos River and became a magnet of the Old West. There, passing cowboys, buffalo hunters, gamblers, outlaws, and people who lived off the night trade all mixed together, earning it the nickname Babylon on the Brazos. Legends passed through the place like John Wesley Hardin, the dentist and gambler Doc Holliday, and his partner Kate, known as Big Nose Kate. It was a loud, half-lawless stopover that showed how the frontier really worked. Fast deals, few questions, and plenty of people carrying guns. Number 4. Charles E. Bowles, known as Black Bart, became famous for robbing Wells Fargo stagecoaches in California between 1875 and 1883. Born in England and raised in New York, he headed west during the gold rush of 1849, where the promise of fortune turned into something else. He became a highway robber. Unlike most, he worked alone, was polite, never fired a shot, and left poems as his signature. There were 28 confirmed heists, a prison term in San Quentin, and his release in 1888. After that, he vanished from the record, and that's where the legend grew. Number 5. In the Old West, whiskey was more than just a saloon toast. It became FireWater. Merchants showed off its strength by tossing a splash into a flame, which flared up instantly. The recipe followed no rules. Hastily distilled alcohol, burnt sugar, chewed tobacco, and whatever else was on hand. The goal was simple: sell something that knocked people down fast. One shot could change a deal, a man's courage, and the course of an entire night. Number 6. Elmer McCurdy, a train robber from the early 1900s, died in a shootout with the police in 1911 in Oklahoma. With no family to claim him, embalmer Joseph L. Johnson charged a penny to anyone who wanted to see the outlaw's body dressed up in bandit clothes. Years later, 2 men posing as his brothers took the body and sold it to traveling shows. The mummy became a sideshow attraction and eventually ended up hanging in a funhouse in California. In 1976, crew members realized the dummy was actually a real person. In 1977, McCurdy was finally buried in Guthrie. Number 7. Jesse James became the very symbol of outlaw life in the Old West, but many people saw his older brother Frank as the tougher one. Together they led the James Younger Gang, robbing banks and trains, raids that often ended in bloodshed. When Jesse was killed in 1882, Frank turned himself in to the governor of Missouri and summed up his life. "I literally lived in the saddle. "I never knew a day of perfect peace." Tried and acquitted, he gave up crime and spent the next 3 decades doing regular jobs until his death in 1915. Number 8. James Deacon Jim Miller, whom many called Killer Miller, roamed the West with a reputation that mixed religion and violence. Official records credit him with 14 killings. Rumors push that number into the dozens. He didn't drink or smoke, went to the Methodist Church and helped lead services, but he also sold his skills as a hired gun. Many believe he was behind the murder of Pat Garrett, the sheriff who took down Billy the Kid. Under his coat, he wore a steel plate that once stopped 4 bullets. In 1909, in Ada, Oklahoma, a mob hanged him. His story stands as a stark picture of the contradictions of the Old West. Number 9. In 1870, on the route between Elizabethtown and Taos, a traveler stopped at a roadside ranch run by Charles Kennedy and his Ute wife, Rose. The couple had a 5-year-old boy. When the stranger arrived, the child whispered that his father killed guests and would do the same to him. Hours later, gunshots rang out. The traveler was dead. To silence the accusation, Kennedy also killed his son. Years of disappearances along the trail revealed the pattern. Those who slept in that cabin rarely continued their journey. Their belongings kept the killer supplied until his arrest and lynching. Number 10. In the early 1870s, the Bender family, John, Elvira, Kate, and John Jr., ran a small inn along the Osage Trail in Kansas. Travelers started disappearing, letters stopped arriving, and the area grew uneasy. When neighbors searched the place, they found a grave and human remains near the orchard. The inn's main room had a trap door stained with blood. The family had already vanished. Arrests and deaths were reported later, but nothing was ever proven. The case became an Old West legend and still raises questions today. Number 11. In the West, card players liked to sit with their backs to the wall, eyes on the door. They said it could save your life. In 1876, in Deadwood, Dakota Territory, James Butler Wild Bill Hickok tried to keep that habit at Nuttall and Mann's Saloon number 10. That afternoon, the right chair wasn't open, so he sat with his back to the entrance. Jack McCall came in through the back door and shot Hickok in the head. They say he was holding aces and eights, the dead man's hand. That bullet ended an icon and became a warning to anyone who lived by cards and luck. Number 12. Mary Catherine Horany, known as Big Nose Kate, left Hungary as a child and lost her parents early on. Raised by other families, she wandered across the West until she ended up in Texas, where she became a saloon girl and met John Doc Holliday. Their partnership was a mix of love and convenience. He gambled and shot, and she watched his back. In Fort Griffin in 1877, Kate set fire to a shed to distract the police and break Doc out of jail. Years later, he'd ride with Wyatt Earp to the OK Corral, while she kept the reputation of a woman who never backed down. Number 13. In the Old West, the bandana wasn't just decoration. It was a tool for anyone living in trail dust and frontier showdowns. It protected your nose and lungs during cattle drives, shielded your neck from the sun, doubled as a rag in the camp kitchen, and at night kept the wind off your ears. When the law got too close or too far, all it took was pulling the cloth over your face to turn into a nobody. Along with the hat, saddle, and Colts, the bandana became a trademark of those who made do in a tough, ever-moving land. It wasn't fashion. It was something you carried because, in the end, it could save your day. Number 14. In 1865, Alice Ivers came from England with her family and ended up in the mining camps of Colorado. She left boarding school and, among smoke-filled tables, learned to play poker. At Bob Ford's saloon, the man who killed Jesse James, she earned her nickname, Poker Alice. She played with a cool head, used small talk as bait, and one night won $6,000, a fortune for the time. In 1910, when a fight broke out in her own saloon, she fired back and killed a soldier. She went to trial and was acquitted, but by then the legend was already sealed. Number 15. Pearl Hart was born in Canada and, after seeing Buffalo Bill's show, decided to try frontier life for herself. Still young, she hit the road to Arizona. There, her marriage fell apart. But fame came with her partner in crime, Joe Boot. In 1899, the two held up a stagecoach and shared the money with the passengers. a gesture that didn't stop the manhunt. Lost in the desert, they were eventually caught. Media attention turned Pearl into a rare symbol of female crime in the West. She served about 18 months and was released with a pardon, in a system that had no idea what to do with women outlaws. Number 16. In 1860, the Pony Express dared to connect St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, more than 1,950 miles on horseback. Messages crossed the country in about 10 days because every 12 miles, both horse and rider were swapped out. The operation lasted just 18 months, from 1860 to 1861, burning through about $110,000. When the transcontinental telegraph line was completed, the service lost its purpose. But the lesson remained. For a brief moment, America tested the fastest speed that leather and courage could deliver. And even today, the legend of the Pony Express still rides on in the myths of the Old West. Number 17. In 1856, the U.S. Army tried out a curious experiment, using camels to cross the deserts of the West and South. Inspired by troops who used the animals in Asia and Africa, they brought 66 of them from the Middle East and set up base at Camp Verde, Texas. At first, it worked. The camels could handle thirst, heavy loads, and long distances, but they were hard to control and spooked the horses. After the Civil War, the project was shut down. The camels were sold off or set free, and the idea faded into a footnote of frontier history. Number 18. The idea of taking scalps didn't start with any one people. In parts of North America, similar practices existed before Europeans arrived, and later got worse when colonies started offering bounties for them. The Apaches in the Southwest were mentioned in some accounts, but the name of the mountain range to the east, the Appalachians, comes from a completely different origin. In the 19th century, the Civil War brought new kinds of brutality. Confederate guerrillas like Bloody Bill Anderson became infamous for executions and mutilations meant to spread fear and control. The act turned into a grim badge of prestige among rivals. Number 19. Called St. Elmo's fire, the glow appears when the air gets charged around sharp objects. During storms, it takes the shape of a bluish flame clinging to masts and spars, something known since ancient sailing days and seen as a sign of protection. In the 19th century, out on the western plains, it sometimes flickered on the horns of cattle and the tips of horses' ears. The sight, rare and silent, made the animals restless and sent chills through cowboys and gunmen alike, who took it as an omen and thought twice before moving on. Number 20. Hollywood sold the idea of the cowboy as only white, but in the 19th century the reality was different. About a quarter of all cowboys were black. On ranches they herded cattle, branded calves, broke horses, and faced off in rodeos. During the Civil War, many white men went off to fight and left everything in the hands of enslaved people who kept the ranches running. After gaining freedom, those same men kept working as paid cowboys, chasing a paycheck, respect, and a place on the Western map. Still, the credit rarely ever made it to the screen. Number 21. In the 19th century American West, bounty hunters only got paid if they delivered proof of the dead man to the authorities. At first, that meant riding for miles with a body tied to the saddle. Slow, heavy, and expensive work. When photography studios started popping up in towns, things changed. They'd bring the corpse there, take a picture of the face, and attach it to the paperwork. To make it easier, the body was propped up against a wall, just enough to hold the pose. After that, it was cleared for removal, and the hunter hit the trail again. Number 22. In the American West, the saloon was the public living room, a place for drinking, gambling, music, and business, but also for fights and knives in boots. Forget the fancy chandeliers. The first ones were rough shacks built along cattle trails and mining camps. In Dodge City, the Long Branch Saloon became a symbol of that loud, restless life. It started simple, grew with cattle money, and burned down at the end of the 19th century. The myth survived. The tourist reconstruction shows how the frontier turned into a profitable memory. And the question still hangs: was it a party, danger, or both at once? Number 23. Known in the West as Sitting Bull, Tatanka Iotanka led the Lakota through a century of sieges and broken promises. He knew how to fight, but also how to negotiate, trying to hold back the spread of forts and railroads. After years of clashes with U.S. and Canadian troops, he surrendered and was taken to a reservation. He spent 4 months working in Buffalo Bill's show, riding Lakota style across North America and Europe. He spoke to crowds and posed for posters until he realized that spotlight wasn't his path and returned to his people. Number 24. In the Old West, women were a loud minority. In most towns, there were 3 men for every woman, and in California during the gold rush, the ratio climbed to 9-to-1. In saloons, women were hired to sing, dance, and make conversation, keeping customers drinking and the money flowing. Not all of them sold sex. Many set boundaries and were treated with respect, sometimes even earning more than respectable jobs. That gap, despite the stigma, showed how they carved out space and income there in their own way. Number 25. Geronimo, also known as Geronimo, was born in Sonora and grew up among the Apaches in what is now New Mexico. He witnessed invasions, broken promises, and growing pressure to accept life on reservations. Instead, he chose the wild and the saddle, leading his group through deserts and mountains, crossing back and forth between Mexico and the United States, always negotiating and fighting to keep their independence. When the pursuit finally closed in, he surrendered. In his later years, he adopted Christianity and made a living selling crafts and autographs, a symbol of resistance and forced adaptation.